Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for youth sports football. Me and Tom, we're back on the mic, breaking up the regular continuity of our exit meeting episodes we've been pumping up. Stay tuned for the Queen's episode coming out later this week, but not on this day, because on this day, though, the Queen's Golden Gales will come up. It'll come up solely in the context of talking about the Invitational and National CFL Combines that we have just wrapped up checking out. We will talk about all those things and much more. But first, Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
I'm always doing well whenever I get a chance to talk some U Sports football with you, my friend. And the other side of things, especially because we are feeling so nationalistic and proud of our country and supporting Canadian, I'm going to say that the CFL Combine and the format and how they do it is so much better than the NFL Combine and how they do things, specifically because in our combine settings, we have on-field work where guys can showcase what their talents are against the other top-tier guys. As you and I have gotten into a few times, and I'm sure we'll get into here as well, if for no other reason than I'm going to start things off here.
Do it.
All of the combine results and metrics and things that you're using to test, like the 40, the bench press, and everything else, really means squat to showcasing how good a football player really is. So to have that on-field stuff just makes us Canadians that much better.
Elbows out, baby. And
Elbows out.
and honestly, like let's roll with that, right? Because we're kind of here. We're recording a few days following up the national combine wrapping up. I know a lot of people were reaching out about when we were going to do a pod about the Invitational, the one that I was in the house for. You were in the house for it last year, and we kind of just figured, what? Why don't we just wait till we get really to this point? There's going to be a lot of the same conversation. We'll get a little more light on how these players are doing. I think absolutely, you're absolutely right. The reps are where it counts. I'm certain there's probably, like, in some regards, there's probably the same way that we look at the bench and the 40 and all these drills that they do, and we think, well, it kind of takes it out of the nature of the matchup. And then someone could be like, well, we don't do the reps because we just watch the game tape and everything like that. And sure, maybe that's valid as well. But so, like, in the course of that conversation, I think one of the things that you really brought to attention, and you notice in the little handout they give you at the Invitational, I'm sure it's no different than the National Combine, is they will track what these players did at their East-West year, the year before, because I think it was you brought to the attention. We were just talking about all these things of like, yeah, but you know what? At the very least, it shows you whether these players have been tracking positively or not. And obviously, there's tons of things that can kind of get in that way, though the Queen's pod isn't out yet. We talked about with Silas Hubert, one of the attendees at the National, and how he had 20 reps on the bench press. But this is a dude, whether you thought that, for one of the best D linemen in the country, he should be a little higher than that or not, who was actively battling a shoulder injury for the last, I think, 2 years, right? So that kind of comes into account. And then I'm sure some coaches are going to look at that and say, like, he's got moxie, he's tough, he's gritting it out. But on that piece of it, the sort of testing thing, we kind of just roll them out there in their underwear and say, go forth. I mean, the testing part does feel a little antiquated, but what are those things that you look at and you say, no, you know what? Here's really where, if you're being smart about it, you can glean some value from this.
Certainly the way that guys move and how flexible you can be in areas. And that's really a great showcase to how athletic somebody is and how well and how fast they're going to move. If you see a defensive back get nice and low in his back pedal, and you can see a good knee bend, ankle bend, hip bend, very similar to an offensive lineman as well, then you know that you can really see something. And that's going to become apparent pretty early on. While certainly, there's certain aspects of those combine testing. Like, I think the vertical jump is a great tester of that, especially for defensive backs and receivers and running backs and linebackers, but even as offensive and defensive linemen, because it showcases the explosion that you can have from getting to the ground up. And a big part of that as well is the broad jump for that same kind of reason. It's why, doing cleans in the weight room is so important for that same kind of explosion. So there are a number of things in there that I do think are pertinent and are a good aspect of this, but to have everybody say the be all end all of strength is, the bench press and how many times you putting up the bench. And while certainly you're strong as an ox, if you can move that thing 20, 30, 40 times, doesn't always mean you can replicate that every single play, every single rep, every time you go up against somebody, because you need to have proper technique and proper everything as you're going up. So I don't necessarily think that the combine and the testing regimens aren't working. I just think that we put way too much emphasis on some of these big numbers here that we think, okay, he put up so many or he was so fast in the 40, that's automatically going to mean he's a great football player. And it doesn't.
No, no, absolutely. And again, I like the body movement, the way that guys are positioned. Obviously, in just the context of the conversation, I'll probably anecdotally bring up some of the stuff from the Invitational Combine. But one of the cool things about having that in advance of the National is you get to see who are the guys they get the call up for
Mm.
the National, and just having some conversations at the event with a strength conditioning coach from one of the teams. And we're kind of talking about they make the turnaround pretty quick in terms of how they evaluate on the field and then make the decision of in this case, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 names that they called up. My assumption is that they probably have a short list of guys that they're like, here are the dudes that just didn't make the cut for the National. If they show out in this instance here, then it really gives them an opportunity. And where I want to go with this is that we saw both Jackson Tuchinski and Keegan Hall go from the Invitational to the National. And you think about those names, and these are guys that, I mean, Keegan's a guy, for those who aren't familiar, York Lions superstar in Keegan Hall. But, obviously you are someone who knows him really well from your experience being in Hamilton, but also getting to meet him, the east-west of it all. And same with Jackson Tuchinski. And so you might look at these names and then you think about who the quarterbacks at the National were, and it's just when you then and so you say, well, obviously, yeah, you got these guys out of Quebec, and obviously you have Vanier Cup champs, you have Heck Crichton champs, and all these types of things. It really seems like what Arnaud Desjardins and what Jonathan Senecal did out there really showed why guys as good as Jackson Tuchinski and Keegan Hall are still had scouts being like, yeah, we want you to come, but there's a gap between these two guys and just where we have you right now. Tom, by all accounts, those studly quarterbacks out of the RSEQ, one who I'm willing to say friend of the show in
Hmm.
Arnaud Desjardins.
Hmm.
My goodness, really seemed to have some people, turning heads at that National.
Yeah, 100%. When you look at the size and strength that was really showcased there, I think Jonathan Senecal and the way that he plays the game is so incredible because he's able to make big plays happen by using his shifty illusion. He's got great vision when he throws the ball downfield, and he's a hell of an athlete. But when it comes into these kind of combine settings, which are very much cut and dry, okay, here's your route tree, stay in the pocket, throw the ball because you don't have anybody really rushing after you. That's where this kind of pocket quarterback, like an Arnaud Desjardins or even like a Keegan Hall, can really shine from that side of things. And that's exactly what Arnaud Desjardins did. I mean, when you look at a guy like a Jonathan Sadekal, a former Heck Crichton winner, and you're thinking, my God, like he's got this, he's got that, he's so incredible for what he did for Montreal. Then you look over at Arnold Desjardins, and he's got a bigger frame, and he can throw the ball a little bit farther, and he sits in the pocket a little bit more comfortably. The throws that he was making to some of his receivers were on the money, on the dot. And let's not forget here, at best, you've got 2 days to really try to establish some kind of a rhythm here between quarterback and receivers. Now, albeit these are all-star caliber players because you're invited to the CFL Combine for a specific reason here, but still, it takes a little bit of time to get that understanding how they run a route or the size or whatever. And I think Arnaud Desjardins really did a hell of a job turning some heads and putting his name out there as a very serious Canadian quarterback who can make some waves in the league.
Most definitely. And, sticking with the Quebec piece of it all, again, this is just sort of in the context of the guys I saw at the Invitational, at the National, and there's obviously a plethora of guys we can dive into. Go into the line play. And thinking about what Gabriel Lissard did, this is a dude, and it's funny, like looking up a bit about him in prep for this. I mean, it's guy's 25 years old, which it's just, hey, salute to you, Quebec. You
Mhm.
do football right out there. But this guy just looked different on the field, and I'm kind of now understanding why, given that he's probably 2, 3 years older than everyone else on the field. But at the Invitational, like it kind of had that boys versus men look to it. Super dominant there in the crossover one-on-ones. But then, so yeah, I mean, we can get into some of the other Quebec guys, but I guess the last note on just the call up guys, just from the line perspective, seeing a guy in Liam Hoskins out in Windsor, and I don't have the numbers. Oh, I have the numbers in front of me. What he did today, putting up very very respectable numbers at the national as well, and as well Chisenham Incident, as far as another OUA guy that was able to get that call up. But again, whether Hoskins is a bit of a lesser known name, that Windsor defense has been stellar as any other. I think the name that you and I were so happy with, and just who dominated those crossover appearances. I don't know if you were able to see any of the performance from the National Combine. I don't know if they do any footage of it. But your guy in Ethan Pyle, dude.
Mhm.
I mean, if only just to talk about what needed to be spoken of after that invitational, a guy who is undoubtedly one of the smaller linemen there, and it didn't matter who he was going up against. And like a guy of my own heart, just seeing an undersized old lineman in Guelph colors. That reminds me, maybe we'll talk about the Guelph logo change. But for right now, let's talk about Ethan Pyle, and what he did on these 2 days.
Yeah, I think he really impressed with the play that he has here. And I think one of the most impressive aspects of that is he played center when he was at Guelph. He played a number of positions, but center just most recently here. And in his weigh-ins, he's listed at 6'1" and 5/8, 284 pounds, which for those who don't know, as a center, that's pretty damn light. And for him to still be going up against guys like a Darian Newell, like all of the outstanding defensive guys. I mean, when you look at the entire roster of some of these dudes who are here, this is a very defensive heavy draft class because my goodness, some of these position groups and how these guys play. I mean, just some of these. Claudia Moosen is there. Ty Anderson, Liam Hoskins, Silas Hubert, Darian Newell, Chisenham Incident, Jeremiah Ojo, Max von Muhldorfer. I mean, this is a stacked team and a stacked defensive line in particular here. And Ethan Pyle really showcased himself. One of the great aspects of this, while I was at Guelph coaching in 2019, we were actually in the process of recruiting Ethan Pyle and trying to get a sense of who he was. He came to a camp that we were hosting for high school kids at the time, and he was there. And Coach Mike McDonald, who, if you don't know by now, Zach and I are huge fans of, not just as a person, but a hell of a football coach. He really knows what he's talking about from an offensive line play. Praised Ethan immediately because of the mental aspect that he brings to the game as well. Obviously, being as a center, you need to have a good understanding of the entire offensive line, schemes and defensive fronts and everything. But Ethan Pyle took it to the next level, even as an 18, 19-year-old kid here. So I'm very, very happy for this young man. He really showcased, and his draft stock, as they like to say, really rose after this combine.
Yeah, so proud of what he's doing out there. And yeah, maybe we'll save the Guelph logo chat for when we talk about them on the exit meeting. Sticking with the OUA side of things, because obviously that's where our bread is buttered. It's to no surprise that still represented in the highest number are the Western Mustangs. And the names, if you're unfamiliar, haven't gone through or didn't check them out, include the likes of Keanu Yazbek, Braden Masseri, Jackson Finley, Eric Anderson, Riley McLeod, Alex Berwick, and Max von Muhldorfer. And I went in that order intentionally, if only to end on von Muhldorfer, who we've seen as, just when he came into Western, just had the look of just like a traditional one tech, maybe a bit of three tech. Super physical dude. Saw him a few times in the weight room during my time at Western. A guy moves weight like no other. We started to see this past year, much perhaps in kind of unison with Coach Gleason's defense taking a slight different form than what we'd seen in the past. Muhldorfer getting moved around a little bit more, and even on certain series where he's ostensibly at defensive end, and then to see him. And again, the weigh-ins and everything, sometimes how much stock you put into it is, up for grabs. But to see him weigh in at, 6 3/4 and only 290, We were talking about this a little bit, and it's kind of fun where we can kind of read in some where I'm like, to the average, Joe or Jill tuning in, 290 doesn't sound light by any metric. He doesn't play like he's 290 there in the middle for Western. Is a guy who throw it up 34 reps on the bench press, running a sub 5 at 496. Like, that's darn impressive. I don't have too great a read. Like, when I think about the defensive lineman and more of that interior defensive lineman that often get the call up from the Canadian side of things, they're less of the Von Muhldorfer kind of build and usually a little bit more of for some reason Derek Wigan just comes to mind. More of
Mhm.
that, like or Daryl Wadd, to go back
Yeah.
to a former Western Mustang interior guy who had some success at the next level. Where yeah, super big, but almost like more athletic than just a kind of. And again, not that this was Von Muhldorfer, but a kind of like can just control a gap like no other, and you can't displace him. I think Von Muhldorfer really stepped up in his game this past year, and the weigh-in, I think, maybe validates the direction that maybe some coaches, CFL wise or locally at Western, are maybe telling him to go.
Yeah, especially when you look at the trends of an outstanding defensive lineman here. I mean, you start thinking about a Darian Newell, a Max von Muhldorfer, and all of these interior guys that we've seen, even over the past few years here. They all have this similar kind of style here. Certainly, there's a bit of a range. There's at least, I'd say on the low side, 6 foot to 6'1", up to like 6'4", 6'5" kind of thing. But most of the really successful ones, both in U Sports and the CFL, are around that 280 to 300 mark, where they're light from that standpoint. And obviously, saying somebody is 290 pounds is light, it's hilarious. But from this context, they are, but just monsters in terms of strength. And I think that's exactly the fit that Max von Muhldorfer has here. I mean, like you said, 6 foot and 3/4 is his official height that's listed there, 290, and then 34 reps on the bench press is just a monstrous number for this young man. So I think he did a hell of a job here as well, showcasing some great athleticism here. I think he really impressed some of the scouts that I had a chance to speak to as well. So, Max, hell of a job to you, sir.
Most definitely, and of course he's there with a whole stable of his teammates, and the obvious parallels if you're going to look are thinking about the two on the other side of the line in Alex Berwick and another our guy all star in Eric Anderson, and it feels like some of the what you're reading online about Berwick is a bit less than stellar in terms of what guys or what prognosticators felt about his performance out there. Again, neither of us, Tom, made the trip out to Regina to watch the live reps. I do think sometimes there is a blessing and a curse of playing line for Western, where you've been a starting center, multi-time All-Star for the Western Mustangs. Then all of a sudden people have a high bar of what they think you could do, and not to think that Berwick's not that. And, he fills in for a guy in Elliot Beamer who is such a star for them. But on the flip side, you think about a guy in Eric Anderson, our dude, where, putting up just the 18 reps on the bench. He doesn't run. He was dealing with, I think it was a knee injury that kind of had him in and out a little bit. His jumping's not like gonna knock your socks off or anything like this. But you just know, like, this dude can play some football, right? And so there's kind of that weird thing where on the one hand, sometimes the testing becomes the be all end all where you say that's a red flag. For another guy, you say, oh, but just watch the tape. From what you've talked to with scouts, whether it has anything to do with that comparison of those two guys, like, again, I think to be fair and to state frankly the obvious, though they're both at this combine, like, we know that Anderson has a higher value, is the better player. Like, where do you see from your conversations with scouts and with coaches when the results versus the film weigh a little bit more so?
Yeah, I think when you start looking at offensive linemen here, and I think what you said really plays into this really well. You look at a Western offensive lineman who's been a multi-year starter, your expectations are at the ceiling for what you think they should be doing. And there's a lot of guys, like I think Eric Anderson had that exact same thing. I mean, the dude is listed at 6'5" and 3/4 at 314, and moved really well. Did 18 on the bench with long ass arms, which is still very impressive. I think that when you look at something like that, you can almost be set up to fail in that standpoint. Now, naturally, just going into this, I think the general setting here was that this was a weaker offensive line grouping, which is kind of the vibe that I got from a few folks that I had spoken to with it. Whereas you had a very strong defensive line showing. So obviously, anytime that happens, when you get into those on-field sessions, when you're doing the one-on-ones and that can be a little damning from that standpoint as well, because you're going up against the best of the best of the best here. I mean, I listed off a bunch of those defensive linemen that Ethan Pyle had to go through. That's the same line that Alex Berwick had to go through. And everybody that I spoke to said the two guys on the line that had the best day, bar none, Max von Muhldorfer and Darian Newell, both guys that would have had to go up against Alex Berwick there. So there's a bit of a give and take from that standpoint. I think you and I had also seen, even throughout the season, there was a couple of times where Berwick's snaps were not always completely centered and they were kind of all over the place. So he did have a little bit of that going into the season, but I don't think that makes him a bad offensive lineman. I still think that he's a very solid offensive lineman, and there's a lot of teams out there in the CFL that need good quality Canadian linemen. So I still think that he's got a very good chance of being drafted in that in this session here, but maybe he did hurt his draft stock a little bit.
It's hard to tell. There's so much just, there's also the part on just team need versus best available player and when that factors in. Second to Western by no surprise is, of course, what Laurier was trotting out there, and the number, of course, would have been higher if Taylor Elgersma wasn't so busy at a pro day for the NFL at the University of Buffalo or some random stuff that he has on the go. And as we were mentioning, Chisholm and Malik, they get the call up, or was Malik there to begin with? I can't remember exactly, but join the likes of Jahari, Hastings, and then that dynamic duo receiver and Raiden Thorne and Ethan Jordan. I want to talk about the receivers because it's funny when you look at this receiving core where, again, Ethan Jordan put up a year this past year where we're having the conversation that he might be the true MVP of this offense, or maybe you think like he might actually have the better shot, the Heck Crichton, or all these types of things, what he did out there. Raiden Thorne, a bit injured this year and everything of that nature. But then you have that conversation, you talk receivers at Laurier, and I'm sure these guys would admit it too. When you say, oh man, next level, what's it going to look like? And they're all going to say, well, just wait till Laomi Ojatalayo goes, because he's got that build, he's got that dog at him. The special team stuff is crazy what he does out there. But when you look at these two guys, and we talked about this in our conversation about Justin Pace, linebacker for Queens, when you play as a linebacker in front of some studly D linemen, a few of whom, Darian Newell and Silas Hubert being two of them who are also on this list, it helps you at linebacker. For receiver, when you got a guy in Taylor Elgersma, it certainly helps out. Obviously, not a broadcasted event. I'm not online, so I'm not seeing any clips that might get out there. When you think about Ethan, when you think about Raiden Thorne not having their go-to guy in Elgersma, the numbers obviously look all right. Ethan Jordan with the 4.44 across the board. Raiden Thorne at 4.78. He's also a much bigger build than Ethan Jordan is. What are some of the things thinking about these two guys who have been as productive? EJ perhaps more specifically, but as productive as any duo of receivers, and then almost them both being there, it almost feels kind of awkward where they're kind of competing against each other for the first time, in I guess 4 years really.
Yeah, I think going into this, just looking at these guys on paper from a few guys that I had a chance to speak to, Raiden Thorne kind of sticks out a little bit more because he does have that 6'2" frame at 188 that certainly leaves a little bit more room to put on some mass if you need be, whereas Ethan Jordan comes in at 5'10", 177. But there was already something of a knock on Ethan Jordan as he was entering into this combine, because people were saying, well, how good is he versus the guy he had throwing to him? And it was almost one of those catch-22s where it's like the better and better that Taylor Elgersma was doing, the less and less impressive that it seemed like Ethan Jordan was. And in this combine, he put all of that to rest. Everybody that I had a chance to speak to said that he really showed out. He did his thing. His catch radius is outstanding. His ability in his hands were fantastic. And the way that he moves, sure, you're looking at a 4.4. Maybe that's not, oh my God, blow the top off fast, blah, 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 whatever you want to talk about. It's still like the second fastest in the entirety of the CFL Combine here. So shut your mouth first and foremost. But secondly, his ability to cut on routes, his route running is outstanding. It's why he was able to get so open in a lot of these scenarios. If you're actually watching these Laurier Golden Hawks, and if you weren't watching them last year, what the hell are you doing? It was one of the best teams that you'd seen in a while, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But the violent nature that he has when he makes a break. How many times did we see it in the Vanier Cup when he's coming out and he does a very sharp corner route or a sharp comeback route, and there's a couple of degrees or a couple of yards of separation between him and the defensive back, and that's all that Elgersman needs to find his guy. But that comes from route running, not just because of a ball placement or whatever else. So I think Ethan Jordan really did a hell of a job in this draft and really showcased why he was the first 1,000-yard receiver in Laurier football history.
No doubt. And, not to go through an exhaustive list, we can, one of the fun exercises that maybe I'll do a bit more prep as we get closer to the draft is that, yeah, you might be able to say Thorne's got a bit more of that size. We can find comps of guys who had very, very good CFL careers who are a bit more of that EJ type build, the beautiful route running, and then just the shiftiness of it all. So again, that's the beautiful thing of our game. Let's flip it over. We're just talking about how effective these two were as a receiving duo this year in the OUA. Obviously, some of the other guys out there, B-Miz, Braden Mazaire was doing his thing out there. Our guy in Vashon Genesis, obviously, as another huge name out there. Kasim Fernand, but some of the defensive backs, at least repping out of the OUA, who had to try and guard these guys this year. And obviously, we mentioned the name in Ashton Miller Melanson, but also thinking about my guy and Eric Cumberbatch in the mix, Jahari Hastings, Malik Kote, Azor, and of course, the man, the myth, the legend in Jackson Finley out there. We were saying beforehand, we took the time to figure out who our favorite CFL team was. Shout out to the banner at the top of the CFL page. And surprise, surprise, me and Tom scored neither of our actual favorite teams. But hey, good on you for trying. But we're joking that, man, oh man, like, is there anything harder in this world than being a defensive back playing Canadian football? We know we got some good ones here in Ontario that were repped at the National Combine. What's the word on some of our defensive brethren out there doing their thing in the secondary?
Well, specifically talking about your dude in Eric Cumberbatch, he really had an impressive showing, especially on the Friday. I think a lot of scouts were really impressed with how well he was able to move and some of the numbers that he had. I mean, he's listed at 6'2", 202, puts 14 up on the bench, a 4.5 on the 40, 39-inch vertical, which was tied second in the entirety, only behind another defensive back from Laurier, Malik Kote, who went 41 inches in vert, which is absolutely insane. But Cumberbatch really impressed a lot of people with how well he was able to move out there and some of the outstanding things that he was doing. Loved everything that I saw from Malik as well. I think he turned a lot of heads and he was able to showcase some of his outstanding athleticism there as well. There's one other name that I really want to highlight, and he's not from the OUA, so it might shock a few people. But yes, we are a U Sports podcast, not just an OUA podcast. But one, Delaney Robinson, a defensive back from Regina. We had a chance to see him in the East-West Bowl as well, and he once again showed out in this one as well. I mean, he's listed at 6 foot and 7/8. Come on, guys, that's 6'1". 6'1" and 190. He ran a 4.5 40. But the way that he plays a lot bigger because this dude is not afraid of contact. We saw him a couple of times. I saw him up close and personal at the East-West Bowl, and he was the exact same player then as he is now, in that he doesn't shy away from contact. If anything, he invites it. He gets after guys. There's a couple of times where I noticed there was a short route and receiver tried to block him. His immediate response was, I'm going to bury my head into your chest and drive you 10 yards into the backfield, shed a block, and then make a tackle here. So From an offensive line standpoint, God, I love this dude. And I love watching him play, but he really impressed me with the play that he has. He's an athletic kid. He's got good range, and he kept up in terms of speed with a lot of guys making some great plays on those one-on-ones as well. So really wanted to make sure that I shouted out one Delani Robinson from the Regina Rams.
The Regina Rams, indeed. And you know what? Again, some talent across all the conferences that we've become familiar with just through our coverage of the playoffs and everything of that nature. And seeing a guy, another Can West guy, and Isaiah Knight, who's certainly on the radar for a lot of folks. That 5'11 and a half, 212, then running the 4'8. But again, when you watch this guy just play the game, it's super impressive doing his thing for the Thunderbirds out there in UBC. And a host of other names. Like we went through all the, some of the Montreal and Laval guys out here. Just get, these are the guys that we see every single year comes national semis and Vanier Cup time. Tom, what are some of your final takeaways from this here combine we had?
Well, so there's a few guys that I want to make sure that I'm really highlighting in terms of outstanding play. And of course, I can't leave the defensive back group without talking about our guy in Jackson Finley.
Oh,
Once again,
please.
showcasing his athleticism in that side. And I think the thing that really stuck out to a lot of people was his special teams abilities and his ability to move in space and how well he was doing. I mean, how many highlights did we see of his Ottawa game and that outstanding dump tackle? So we know that dude can play some specials for sure. At the linebacker spot, a number of guys really showed out well. Once again, another guy that keeps coming up is Riley McLeod. I mean, you don't have success as a linebacker. I'm pretty sure he started in his first or second year at Western as well. You don't have success like that on a Western defense without being an outstanding player. And that's exactly what Riley McLeod was. I mean, he's listed at 6'1", 228, and put up 18 on the bench, ran just above a 540, but he really showcased some outstanding athletic ability. I think one of the most impressive guys, certainly from that linebacking space, was Seth Hundeby, a linebacker out of Saskatchewan. I mean, 6'2", 251, puts up 20 on the bench, runs a 4.740, really showcases how well he's able to move from that standpoint. And another dude who does not shy away from contact. I mean, most linebackers don't, but this dude hits, and he hits hard. I remember watching some of those Can West and even some of the Can West playoff games as well, and some of the hits you could hear from the stream and just a crack on some of those guys there. So an outstanding job by Seth Hundeby. I think he did a really great job showcasing himself. Obviously, Gabriel Lassard, linebacker out of Montreal as well, did some great stuff. We already talked about the offensive line. Ethan Pyle and Eric Anderson, I think, were the two that really stood out from that side of things. Arnold Desjardins from a quarterbacking side really did his stuff. From the running back, I mean, we have to mention Opie Oshunube when you run a fastest 4.4 on the 40-yard dash. That's an outstanding feat and really, really impressive. I mean, he was the guy that came up from the Invitational Combine. Was he somebody that you really had your eye on when you were there, Zach?
I'd be lying if I said I did, but again, just thinking about that 4.41 time, and sometimes perhaps we get too caught up in seeing the numbers that come out every year at the NFL Combine. Just for a little context, Oshunube running that 4.41 ties him fifth all time for CFL 40-yard dashes. So, again, a name that going into that one I didn't have on my radar, and I don't have his number that he ran at that invitational. But again, we started this whole thing off talking about how much do you really glean from it when you're that fast? You're just that fast. Like, yeah, I haven't been hit in the head too many times that I don't recognize the value. So I'd be lying to say, been crushing a lot of that Golden Bears tape trying to find out about this young lad. No, I haven't. But it's not just what he did on that day in the vacuum of it. These are, again, record-setting type numbers. So.
Yeah, 100%. And that's always going to turn some heads when he was there. And he did a great job in some of the other drills as well. You already mentioned a guy like Isaiah Knight out of UBC. He's a fantastic running back as well. And I think he showcased a lot of stuff when he was there. Going into the last position group, the receivers, we already spoke about Ethan Jordan. I think he had a hell of a day there. Another guy that stood out to me a little bit, but didn't get talked about a whole ton, was Daniel Weeb, wide receiver out of Saskatchewan once again. I mean, he's got solid enough numbers. He's certainly on the smaller side of things, that only listed at 5'9", essentially, and 185, but has been a stalwart staple on that Saskatchewan offense for years now, just showcasing outstanding hands and the ability to route run as well. I think he did a pretty good job, although we'll see if scouts can get past the that smaller stature as well. A similar kind of thing with Ethan Jordan. But another guy that stuck out to me and has always been solid enough and consistent enough, but maybe is on the opposite end of that curse of being on a really good team, was Braden Masseri. Now, when you look at a guy like Braden Masseri, I mean, dude's 6'2", he's 203 pounds, he's running a 4.740. He's a strong receiver, a big target, and on that Western squad, I mean, you've got guys like Seth Robertson and the list of other outstanding receivers there. He can certainly get lost in the wash there a little bit. But I think he really showcased a versatility when he was there, not just as a great receiver making catches and whatever else, but showcasing that, yeah, I'm willing to hit and I'm willing to really make sure that I can earn my way onto a special teams or as a player that way. So look for Braden Masseri, I think, to be one of these guys to really looked at in some of the CFL drafts. And when he gets his chance at a training camp to really show out, I wouldn't be surprised if he sticks somewhere because of that kind of mentality there. But those were just some of the guys that really stuck out to me that I wanted to make sure that I got out there to everybody else listening.
I think for Missouri, I think it's kind of similar. You mentioned like Seth Robertsons and those just other, Mohsen Jamal is he's been playing with, who kind of are the prime targets, and it's a kind of neat parallel to what we just talked about with Laomi Ojatalayo, where because of what, to be able to get on that CFL field, those other intangibles that are going to matter a little bit more, especially earlier in your career, of like, oh, you're a bit bigger, you're a bit more physical, and Missouri will put his helmet like in anybody's grill. Say same thing for Seth Robertson too. Actually, there's some tough receivers out there. I love me some tough receivers. Again, that piece on like guy who was a star in college doesn't always necessarily translate from that level. Just as far as, again, everyone becomes the star athlete. Everyone becomes super jacked. Everyone's doing those things. And I always just find it so fascinating. The more and more guys I get to just chat with over the years who end up making that leap to the next level. And it's rarely someone being like, that guy was just such a dog in the weight room putting up those numbers, or again, those things become the expectations. It's the guys who are taking care of their body, who are doing that extra film work and trying to work on those like minor details, like try to find that inch wherever you can find it. And just that absolute, just, high intensity, lock in mode. I did go through my notes again and just thinking about Oshanubi. I didn't have his name written down, but I did have number 19 written down, which is what he was wearing at the Invitational, where they had him going up against that big dog from Montreal, whose name I'm forgetting off the top of my head, that in Lassard
Harold,
a
yeah,
lot.
Lassard.
Going back to the Invitational. So just having to recheck my notes there. Tom, again, maybe if the national is somewhere a little closer than, Regina, we'll make our trip next year. Again, it's super hard to glean from this far away, but any final comments before we, call it a break on that?
Yeah, I think from across the board, I think people are starting to really look at the Canadian game and the Canadian guys who are here and competing here. I mean, the amount of guys typically you'd see at a CFL Combine, there's a ton of guys who are playing in the States. And while there's certainly a few here, I'd say the overwhelming notion was that these guys and these top quality people are coming from U Sports programs. I mean, when I'm looking at some of the other schools that are represented here, while these are Canadians who have gone down and are coming back up, I think I see like maybe 7 or 8 different American specific schools, where everywhere else out of the I don't know, 30 or 40 guys who were there are all from U Sports programs. So I'm really excited about the notion of the Canadian game continually to grow and getting better and better as things go. And really, you're looking at, and we've talked about a number of years, but this class of quarterback really outstanding from that regard. I mean, obviously, we all know about Taylor Elgersma, Arnold Desjardins, Jonathan Sanacal, Keegan Hall, Jackson Tuchinski, and a list of other guys who are in the same kind of class here. And I'm really hoping that we'll start to see the trend of more and more Canadian quarterbacks playing in the CFL. That would be the ultimate dream from that standpoint. But another outstanding showcase for the Combine. Really, really wish it was freaking live streamed, televised in some way, shape, or form so that football nuts like you and me could actually watch this and get some enjoyment out of it. But who knows? Depending on where it is next year, maybe you and I show up there and we just bring a little camera, iPhone live stream so that the people have something to watch.
I'll say it to this day, one of our best pieces of content was live streaming on Instagram, whatever stories or what have you, 40-yard dashes from about 2-3 yards ago. So we'll keep it in our caps for another day. A name that just popped into my mind, who I'm also, thinking about guys that go down south, is I think this could be the year we see Devin Cromwell make his way back to Canada from Texas Tech. Shout out to the Guelph Griffins. Shout out to the Northern Red Knights here in Toronto, where the young man hails from before heading down to become a Red Raider. On the point of content, with the CFL draft being about a month away, we're still planning out what we want to do from our homes in terms of covering it. Any suggestions, feel free to give us a shout on socials, email, wherever you get a hang of us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's always our main goal to bring you the best content we can produce in covering this great sport of ours. So, Tom, I believe the next time, actually, hold on, Tom, is this last thing, I guess, on this, and this just came to mind, so maybe I'm way off. Is this the double cohort draft now? Is this the year where the COVID additional year
Yes.
comes home to roost?
Yes. So for the folks who may not be aware, when COVID happened, there was kind of a year buffer that the CFL had given the entirety of these U sports and just players in general here, where if they wanted to defer their year for another year in order to train or do whatever, they were able to do just that. And a number of people did that. Well, this year, the CFL is saying, that's come to an end. Everybody who was potentially available and is now eligible, everybody is draft eligible this year, which means there's an influx of people who are draft eligible. It's going to make things very competitive from that standpoint, considering there's only so many teams and so many draft spots here, but that is coming to an end this year.
Very interesting to see how that plays out. I do think there are different rules now, though I couldn't find them online, about just what exactly disqualifies an athlete from going back for another year of U Sport. I think that's changed as well, though I couldn't find it online. So again, for a few reasons, this could be an especially interesting year of the CFL draft. And of course, the Taylor Elgersma piece and the Curtis Rourke piece are very interesting to follow along once we get a little closer to it. But that'll be a wrap for us. Again, give us a shout on socials or just wherever you can find me and Tom. If there's something football related in the Hamilton or Toronto areas, you'll likely be able to find me and Tom there. If you have any suggestions as far as the content ideas that we're thinking about leading into the CFL draft, yes, it'll be on TSN, but what, for the first 2 rounds, I forget how far they sticking for the good fight in there. But hey, it gets Canadian content on the old television box, so that's good for me. Again, the time you're hearing this later in the same week will be our Queens breakdown pod that Tom and I did. The following week, you'll get Windsor, and we'll keep on the march towards the top of the mountain where the Laurier Goldenhawks lay claim. That should lead us nicely into the CFL draft. So we'll have all that coming your way right here at the 55.